Well, the NFL, they just gave Tom Brady a smackdown, but now, as we say, he's luring up. We're going to tell you why the league threw the book at him over Deflategate and ask our panel of attorneys whether or not Brady has a case. Then, you think Donald Trump is outrageous on the campaign trail? Wait till you hear what he says in private depositions. Well, they're not private anymore, and we've got the details to prove it. Also, a Cosby accuser just won a major court victory. And we're going to ask why this could cause a ripple effect and cause a tidal wave of new legal trouble for the comedian. We'll also talk about when it was just the statute of limitations. Why do we have those? And the panel will get into that as well. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us. And we're going to begin tonight with Tom Brady and Deflategate. Now, the NFL Players Association, they're going to appeal the ruling, and they're going to ask for an injunction that will allow him to play in the interim. So the question is, what happened on that football field and what could happen in court? The four-time Super Bowl champ will sit out 4 games. That decision to uphold Tom Brady's suspension based largely on a new accusation. The NFL accuses the star quarterback of having an assistant destroy his cell phone right before meeting with league investigators. In this 20-page ruling, Commissioner Roger Goodell claims Brady, quote, attempted to conceal evidence of his personal involvement in the tampering scheme, end quote. He says that phone contained nearly 10,000 text messages sent during the time Brady was first being investigated for possible involvement in a plan to use underinflated footballs. The same time, Brady was making his first denials.
Is Tom Brady a cheater?
I don't believe so. I mean, I feel like I've always played within the rules.
Brady went to NFL headquarters last month to appeal the suspension in a 10-hour hearing, where analysts believed he had made a convincing case.
He came off, in the words of a person in that room, as an A+10 kind of guy.
But this morning, the battle to defend Brady's reputation continues. His agent, Don Yee, calls the commissioner's decision a sham. And Patriots fans, they're standing by their man.
I think it's crazy, you know, like, I don't know, they can't prove anything.
So let's get our legal panel to weigh in on this. Doug Von Oys, founding partner of Carson Von Oys, focusing on corporate misconduct, selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the country, formerly an assistant district attorney. Jimmy Kasuris, criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, sitting on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association, frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City. He also a former prosecutor, as is Mayo Bartlett, who now is an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC and a former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. And Mark Furnish, he's a professor at Brooklyn Law, and he's argued before the U.S. Supreme Court and likes to argue just in general. Okay, so I start with you, Mark. So basically, the league laid it out. And again, the league is judge and jury on these appeals, but they said, all right, as we understand it, reportedly, the 4-game suspension is going to hold unless basically you allocute to this or you admit that you knew and were party to it. Will reduce the suspension to 1 game, but there's an acknowledgement. Brady says, go scratch. I'm not going to say any such thing. And you'd have no evidence to this point. But the league counters as saying their most compelling, at least new evidence for us, is he destroyed the phone, destroying obviously the texts and the threads of messages into whomever, and that in itself was an act of bad faith. Talk about the process going forward and whether or not you believe he's got a good chance here to have an injunction.
Well, an injunction is one thing. I mean, it's conceivable that he'll get an injunction and be able to start the season.
But as I understand, to get an injunction,
you have
right?
to show the likelihood that you'll win the case. That's true. So that's the paradox. I mean, you read reports of this. I've skimmed the decision. You really don't know what the evidence is. Prognosticators are saying he could get an injunction. Maybe he'll get an injunction. Notwithstanding the standard, I don't see this being overturned. I think the farther he takes this, the louder they yell, the worse it gets. I mean, this thing with the phone hadn't come out until this very decision right here. Don't forget, Kraft, who's a belligerent, bellicose, aggressive owner, They just caved. I mean, they lost a first-round pick. He decided not to appeal the initial discipline. Maybe there was going to be a quid pro quo. Maybe he was reading the tea leaves that Goodell would back off and drop this. That turned out to be a gross miscalculation. Everything the Patriots have done since the inception of this has been a gross miscalculation. They should just clam up and go with it at this point.
And this mail isn't without peril for Brady, which is, let's say he gets an injunction. Then you got to go under oath, right? It's the same kind of thing we saw with A-Rod, although we're not talking performance enhancements, but still, there's one thing with lying with the NFL if there's an investigation, whether you knew, you didn't know, and everything else. There's another thing with going under oath. And now you got the other guys going under oath, including the equipment managers and everything else. You don't know what's going to come out, right?
You have no idea what's going to come out. The difference here, though, is that when he's under oath, it's his word against another person's word. So it's going to come down to credibility.
Unless the other guy's got the texts, right?
Well, if the other guy has the text, then that's a big issue, but he should know whether those texts were sent. The other thing is, though, what is the policy and protocol of the NFL? So you have to be fair enough to have a set policy so that your employees or your players understand what the rules are. You can't continually move the line and have different set of rules for different set of circumstances. The NFL has been a master at doing this. It seems like there is no actual protocol. No one really knows what has happened here. And it also seems that it's very arbitrary in terms of the punishments that are handed out. And you've seen it with Ray Rice, you've seen it with Adrian Peterson. So to come up with 4-game suspension over this, especially given the fact that they destroyed destroyed the opponent in that game. But when you look at it compared to the same 4-game suspension someone gets for beating someone.
And then having those suspensions usually mitigated on appeal to knock it down to 3. Okay, you're Brady's attorney. Do you say to him, posture all you want, but at the end of the day, we don't want this thing going where you got to basically put your hand on a Bible and swear that you're going to tell the truth? Or do you say, time out? Since when does any commissioner or anybody get to be both the judge and then the jury under the appeal here? Let's take them to court. They got nothing on us. Which would you counsel Brady to do? And this is from a Jet fan who wished he was suspended for the year. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, apparently one of the questions is the forum, and that's a big issue. Because if we can go to Minnesota, then I'm telling them fight on, because that's usually where the players win. And so what happened here was it was purposefully brought in the Southern District of New York in order to avoid that. So that's one of the things that goes into the mix and one of the arbitrary parts of this whole thing. Look, if your view of the evidence is that it's very light and they can't make out their case, and there's nothing that your client is going to say under oath that is going to haunt him later or going to be a problem later, you want to see who the accusers are, whether they have any evidence or don't have any evidence. I mean, why can't they get the text? So you destroy your phone. Why?
Well, he didn't have any obligation to produce the texts. There's no question that he didn't have any obligation to produce them under the collective bargaining agreement.
But that's not
But the
what we're
destruction
talking
of the
about.
phone is bad. I mean, it's the optics, it's consciousness of guilt, it's a horrendous
But as
bad
I always
faith.
understood this, Mark, they just don't disappear into the ether.
No.
Couldn't you, if this does go to trial, all of a sudden
Get
go
it
to
from the
that's
provider,
your-
which is
and
what
that's
we've been
your
talking
problem.
about so many times. But here's the thing, there's other badges of bad faith on the Patriots' part here. They didn't produce this McNulty guy for the interview with Wells. To me, factually, the Patriots can't win this factually because Goodell is going to get a lot of discretion.
here's the
And
part-
the
but
court
here's-
has subpoena powers.
Right, but here's the part, Doug, that I and I think the average person at home doesn't understand, which is, okay, whether we think they did it or not, every week you guys tell me you got to prove it. In what court of law are we talking about if he even gets this to a hearing? Is this rules of evidence, we have to prove it, or timeout? All of a sudden the air pressure's down and all of a sudden your phone's destroyed. It doesn't look good, that's good enough. Can you get hung on circumstantial, or if he gets his day in court, if there's no hard evidence, does he win?
Well, if a person doesn't want to plead guilty, and that's what they're asking him to do, they're asking him to plead guilty. You can't force a person. He's taking the facts now, and he wants to move them into the court, out of the league and into a court. If he does that, will have the ability to do discovery. If that's custom and practice in the league, and everybody's doing it, and he's saying, "Hey, listen, you want me to plead guilty?" Everybody's going to plead guilty. Now the whole league is going to be pulled into the court of law.
And he's a pariah.
And by the way, he's
world.
a big boy, and I'm sure he has good lawyers. He's making a calculation that they don't want to be in court also.
Well, here's the thing. I think that the court is going to defer to the league's factual findings. This isn't going to be a full-blown retrial. If there's going to be any traction at all here, the traction is going to be on the claim that Goodell should not be the judge, the appellate judge of his own ruling, and whether that procedural protocol complies with the collective bargaining agreement. That's what this is going to be about. They're not going to retry all the facts on this. They're not going to say the 4 games is outrageous. It's apples and oranges to compare it to Rice. This is dealing with the integrity of the game, and I would argue, look, we can Ray Rice is a much worse malefactor as a human being. Big deal. He's not a poster child and shouldn't be a role model. This is squarely within Goodell's jurisdiction. This deals with the integrity of the game.
And it deals with the integrity of the game much less than steroids does. This
Well,
really
true.
is basically should be a non-issue. We shouldn't even be talking about
No,
this
we
anymore.
should be talking about it because of what you said so many weeks ago. People are gambling large sums of money on this. This is the cash cow. This strikes right at the NFL's pocketbook.
Those
this
are
is
the
a
people
big
who should
deal.
be bringing the lawsuit, though. And the NFL, I mean, again, this is a distraction. It gives the NFL an opportunity to come in and say, look, we're the good guys here. We're doing what we're supposed to do. When really, in so many other cases, you could argue that's not the case.
To me, the one thing above this all is if they put the balls in a room and then they sent the guys into the room after the rest put in there and then messed with the balls, that to me
It's a big deal.
is a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. So,
And here's the thing: it's Brady is the one, and the NFLPA is the ones who made the settlement offer. The league didn't even counter. Goodell just came out with a gross miscalculation on the Patriots' part because Kraft is so powerful that the league was going to.
and Brady's got to figure out at some point, like in all the cases you guys handle, even if you win, do you lose? You know, where is that line where you just say what's worth it or
maybe
not?
Belichick is complicit in this. It's only going to get worse. The Patriots don't exactly have a sterling reputation for.
No matter what, though, right now they'll still be able to face the Jets. The suspension only 4 weeks. All right, we need all the help
Well,
we can
maybe
get.
he'll have to serve it later in December, and they won't face the
That's
Jets.
got to be a factor.
A boy can dream. All right, we want to get you involved in our conversation. Head over to Facebook and Twitter and sound off on our question. Does the NFL's Deflategate ruling change your opinion in any way of Tom Brady? Interested to your answers. All right, when we come back, this guy, the Donald, unplugged in public. He calls Mexican immigrants rapists. By the way, he triples the number that everyone else estimates about. And he also insults a war hero's war record. And somehow he goes up in the polls seemingly every time he does it. But in private, he's got an even worse record, believe it or not, especially when he thinks it'll stay private. Well, now a lot of it's public. We've got the details.